This podcast is a member of the Place to Be Nation family. Visit us at placetobenation.com. The only
time yet, legally. It technically is. At least where I am. We know what it's like on the other side of the world. Welcome, everyone, to this month's episode of your home for Journeys Outward Through the Looking Glass. I am your co-host, Scott Criscuolo. Always a pleasure. It is summer for me. I take pleasure in this, and I love my co-host more than the universe. But I take pleasure in telling him that it's, 84 here. The problem is it's never like 4 degrees where he is. So I want to know how cold it is. Good evening, Dave Hall. How are you?
I'm doing cold from my perspective. I'll say that. It's summer where you are, and I'm sitting in front of the heater with my tracksuit and jumper on, and I'm like freezing my right royal ass off. That's what I'm feeling at the moment. So, for your benefit, the benefit of all our listeners, majority of whom are probably in the US, it is only about 58 your temperature, 58 Fahrenheit. So you're probably thinking mild. I'm
58. Dave, Hall, I would take 58 in January any day of the week. We do our Royal Rumble episodes. You tell me it's 95, and here it's like 4. So
I woke up this morning, and it was like 25. Was it? No, I'm just checking that. I think it was 25. 25 48 your temperature. So I'm it's cold for me down here in Australia. You're lucky, if winter gets down this low, and summer it's boiling hot and ridiculous.
This is like a half serious question, Dave. When was the last time you actually had snow?
We don't get snow where I live. Never.
Ha!
My entire to go to the snow.
Now I officially hate you.
There are parts of Australia where it's a tourist destination. It's probably like the Rockies in Colorado. People go to it's called the Snowy Mountains. We drive to the Snowy Mountains if you want to go to the snow. It just doesn't snow in most of this country. So
that is hilarious. Oh, you're killing me. All right, I love you anyway.
It bloody rains though. We've pretty well had almost rain every week for about the last 6 to 8 weeks. It's just been,
oh my god, oof.
Been one of those time periods. It's been ridiculous. But
I understand. I can understand. Totally. Anyway, always good to have you, Dave. Of course, we love going through journeys, unmanned, unchallenged. This month, Through the Looking Glass, a topic that I love. I mean, I love talking about this, and we never have. And we're on episode 20-something. I think we're in the 30s at this point. I have to double-check our official number.
2.5 years into our journey.
2.5 years. So we're probably, that'd be 24. Yeah, we're somewhere in the late 20s, early 30s, episode number-wise. But in any event, it's been a great 2.5 years. We've done some great topics. And we're going to have a great summer, by the way. Of course, we'll talk. We usually have our SummerSlam episode in August. We'll come up with some stuff, and we'll see what kind of fun things we have in July. But this month, we're going to talk about going back in time through the looking glass to my favorite topic, factions. I love factions. Obviously, most factions are heel because baby faces, don't do anything. But, babyface factions are just the countering of heel factions. But heel factions are what make the world go round throughout all of history, going back to the first family in Memphis, to little factions in Florida, Pack Song and all those guys against Dusty Rhodes. There was another faction that used to hate Dusty Rhodes. We're going to talk about them extensively tonight. And we've seen how factions grew, how factions were created in our history, Dave, both in WWE, in obviously NWA/WCW, ECW, used to have the Jersey Triad, and whatever those guys.
Jersey Triad was WCW.
Not WCW. I'm thinking of shit. Who is the Triple Threat?
Triple Threat. That's with Shane Douglas and Bam Bam Bigelow and Chris Candido.
That's what I'm thinking of. I had Bigelow in my head. So the first thing I thought of was Jersey Triad. That's right. We're not going to talk about the Jersey Triad tonight, thankfully. There were better factions. But anyway, and a lot of factions kind of grew and became dominant, and then they obviously ended because, factions have to end eventually. Tonight we're going to do maybe 3 or 4 examples, depending how long we go. We'll try to keep this tight, of what if a faction did something different? What if they went a different way? What if this guy got picked instead of this guy? What if this guy didn't leave? What if guys leaving didn't cause a faction to end, but regroup? We have a great example of that tonight, of a faction that ended after 2 players left separately. But what would have happened if they kept it and decided to just rebuild it? That's not a terrible idea. So we'll talk about that as well. Believe it or not, I don't think any of our examples tonight involve D-Generation X. We don't have any DX examples tonight because, frankly, my personal opinion, I'm curious your thoughts, Dave. And then I want your thoughts on some of the factions you've loved and what you think about the booking of a faction. But DX, well, before we get to DX, let me ask you, were you a faction fan? What groups did you like as a kid? Do you think they were valuable to wrestling storytelling? What are your thoughts?
I always loved factions. I still love factions. I love the team dynamic that it brings, because wrestling is that individual competition sport, but the rest of sport, maybe except for tennis and golf, the rest of sport is really a team concept. So the idea of guys working together to come up with a common goal was always good. And of course, when it's a heel, it's always normally the goal of the manager or the goal of whoever's the leader of the group to keep them in a position. I always loved the faction side of wrestling. I think it was great. My first, obviously being a WWF, growing up with WWF only, I've shared that before, we only had access to it. We had the manager stables, which not quite the same as the faction, but the Heenan family and Jimmy Hart, the Hart family, the original Hart Foundation, which wasn't really the Hart Foundation, but you had those sort of groups in WWF. But I remember, and I've shared this before, the first APTA magazine I got was heavily focused on the events of the original Clash of Champions and the role of the Four Horsemen. And just reading those stories, I instantly fell in love with the Horsemen straight away. Just reading about what they were doing, I loved it. And then I love the Dangerous Alliance. I always enjoyed the work that they did, and I got to see a little bit of their stuff on TV, and it just goes through the time. I think those dominant factions, those headline groups, have always been just so enjoyable to watch to this day. Like, I'll be honest, it was the bloodline that rekindled, like, my interest in the modern product is, like a lot of people, has been in and out and waning and just doesn't have the appeal. But a lot of the work of the bloodline really, I would just watch TV episodes and PLEs just to see that bloodline storyline. So the factions today, they can still draw you in. They bring a different element. It's always good fun.
Yeah, I think, the bloodline, obviously huge, a huge faction that is obviously, there was a backbone of the company pretty much since, pretty much the pandemic, when Roman Reigns came back in the fall of 2020. And then from that point until Cody beat him, in Philly, that called the shots. Then you have Judgment Day, which started off a little shaky. But let's be honest, no disrespect to either Damian Priest or Finn Balor, but it's a faction led by a woman, which is actually kind of cool.
Well, I tell you what, as the resident Aussie, as the Aussie boy, and we've talked about Rhea before, I loved it. Was it a couple of weeks ago when Drew McIntyre actually threw it out there that these guys, is Rhea happy with the decisions that are being made while she's not around? I'm looking forward to Rhea Ripley's return and what impact it has with the Judgment Day. The same way you've got on the other side of the coin, the same way you can just see what they're building towards with the bloodline, and when Roman returns, you can see that they've got that cooking well too. So these current storylines are really interesting.
They definitely are, and then there's that secondary faction that what the hell are they called? That Karrion Kross is leading. What the heck are they called? I can't even remember now.
They haven't reached enough status to make it worthwhile remembering.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So tonight we're gonna go through maybe definitely at least 4 examples, perhaps a 5th if we have time, where a faction had a pivotal moment, in their history that they took a turn. In our first case, 2 different turns. Both involve maybe the same guy, but from different angles. And then we're going to talk about one of the ones I'm most looking forward to tonight, Dave, is a pretty decrepit faction that unfortunately was all we had in the WWF in the mid '90s. And then we'll have one from the 2000s, and I think everyone knows which one we'll be talking about. But it's an interesting one. All right, Dave. Let's go. Dive in. Where's our first? What's the first glass we will be looking into?
I think often on our show we like to save the best till last, but I think today when you're talking about factions and you're talking about the impact they have and possible directions, you can't go past what is probably, in my opinion, and many, the greatest faction of all time, and that's the Four Horsemen.
Of course,
the Horsemen rewrote the role of the faction because, as we shared before, you had the first family in Memphis, you had factions, Kevin Sullivan's Slaughterhouse and groups down in Oliver Humperdinck's groups down in Florida. There were little factions around, but the Horsemen were really the first national faction. As Crockett expanded, they were the first ones getting national coverage. And
correct.
They were also the first one that it didn't develop because a manager was just bringing guys in that he managed. We all know the story. The Horsemen was this organic formation of guys. And yes, they had JJ as a manager, but he didn't bring them together. They uniquely, just started working together, and Arn Anderson names them. We've heard that before. And so from late mid 86, early 86 through to mid 88, you've got this dominant faction running the company. Flair as world champion, Tully and Arn as the tag champions, and then you had Luger as US, then Wyndham as US champion. They controlled the company, and then in September of '88, it all fell apart when Tully and Arn left the company over a pay dispute with Jim Crockett, and they went. And while Flair and Wyndham were still working with JJ and were still flying the Horseman flag, really, the moment Tully and Arn left, the Horsemen were dead. And it wasn't until, the build-up to Starrcade 89, Halloween Havoc, the return of Arn Anderson, that the Horsemen began to creep back into people's minds.
Correct.
So you've got this big change that happened with Tully and Arn leaving. I guess the question has to be asked: what might have happened with the Horsemen if Tully and Arn didn't leave? If Tully and Arn had stayed the course of time and not left for the pastures up north,
correct?
Would the Horsemen have still been feeding well? Would the company have still continued the direction they were on? It makes for an interesting thought process. I'm sure you've got similar feelings about the Horsemen's early days.
it's funny when I was a fan early on, Dave, just like you, when I first became a fan in 1983, and within a couple of years, you had uh, you had my WWF viewing, which was for the most part loving the baby faces. I obviously drank, as Scott Keith always said, the orange Kool-Aid, red and yellow. But when I would put on TBS on Saturday nights, I was totally in on the Horsemen. No disrespect, love Dusty, and I loved the baby faces, but I liked watching the baby faces get their ass kicked. I loved Flair from the minute I saw him. Arn was amazing. Arn might be my favorite Horseman of all time. I love Flair individually as one of the greatest, but if you ask me my favorite Horseman, it's Double A. Loved my brother loved Tully because he might have been the best. Well, next to Flair, he might have been the best wrestler, and then obviously Ole was just the elder statesman and the last line of bullying defense. Then obviously as you went through the whole thing, and then Barry took over, and the 88 Horsemen. Maybe wrestling-wise, the 88 Horsemen are probably the best group because they were the best workers of the bunch. Because obviously Barry Windham was a better wrestler than Ole from move to move.
Yep.
It's funny. I'm watching right now one of my timelines, Dave, on one of my chrono watches. I'm up to February of '89. So, and there's another name that we brought it up, but there's another name that left that kind of needs to be talked about in the equation when we talk about the Horsemen in 1990. Not only in late 88, early 89 did we lose Tully and Arn, we also lost J.J. Dillon.
Yes.
J.J. Dillon went to the WWF as a booker because I just watched the other day, the February 4th, 89 episode of, the Saturday Night Show, and that's when Flair and Barry debuted Hiro Matsuda as their guy. No disrespect to Hiro Matsuda, but that wasn't his gig. That wasn't his cup of tea.
No.
So I'm gonna add something here, Dave. Let's say not only because the question needs to be asked, besides not having Tully and Arn and what would eventually happen to the Horsemen, but can the Horsemen go without J.J. Dillon?
Well,
what do you think?
I think when you go back to the original incarnation, I think that JJ just added another element to them that was never recaptured in all the efforts to reform the Horsemen over the years. JJ brought he almost felt like the Horsemen were the in-ring boys, and JJ was that consultant, that guy who just seemed to keep everything together. He had the overarching plan. He's like the coach, the head coach.
Right.
Flair was the captain of the team. And everything was sort of done for Flair, but JJ kept them on track. JJ kept them heading in the right direction. You always had that feeling that he was just sort of, it always came across that he was a true manager in the sense of managers. He was dealing with everything off the side while the boys were wrestling and enjoying life and traveling around, and you just how legitimate it was. And I've heard interviews where where Flair and Arn and Tully have talked about, JJ did do a lot of the stuff, and we know JJ worked behind the scenes as well. But you had that feeling like JJ was coordinating their traveling and coordinating their hotels, and he was making sure that the contracts were signed, and like that kayfabe perspective, he really came across as the glue that held them together. And it's interesting that in every effort to bring them back, without JJ, it never seemed to click as well. It never seemed to be as cohesive, and everyone ended up on their own little, their own story arcs without that uniting influence bringing them together. So I think JJ was absolutely vital to their success and how well they came across in that early time period.
Mm. Yeah, he was a good spokesman. Like it's funny when you have a guy like, because the funny thing is too, Dave, when you think about it in the grand scheme, when you have a guy like Flair, you think to yourself, do you even need a J.J. Dillon? But there was a very interesting case where you had two guys, because J.J. was good, Flair was good about talking about himself. J.J. was good about talking to all of them. And you had a guy like Arn cut a good promo. Arn's promos were very foundational. They were very straight up. They were very to the point. They weren't, very effervescent like Flair's was. But when you looked in Arn's eyes, similar to the way you looked in Ole's eyes, you knew he meant it. If he was going to break your leg, you better get insurance. Tully the same way. Tully was a good cutter, just like Flair was. All right, so let's go to the main question then. Let's take JJ out of the equation because I don't think it really matters in the grand scheme of things. So we get into 1990. Flair and Ole are together, even though Ole's not really quote wrestling. And then you have Arn and Tully back in the fold. Obviously Arn returns. Let's say Tully doesn't flunk any fucking coke.
Yeah, there it is. The original plan, Tully had signed. They were coming back. Tully was supposed to be back. So
yes,
there's your original plan was that, and obviously Tully flunked the piss test and lost his contract.
He didn't have any clean piss tests. His WWF piss test failed. His NWA piss test failed. He just couldn't get any clean piss anywhere.
And then he got pissed off about it.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. That's a good one, Dave. That was good. Yep. And he got pissed off about his piss. So let's say that he somehow gets away with it and he passes his test. Now, I think do we still need a fourth active member?
Well, I think the key you need to remember is that it wasn't too far into 90 when Barry returned as well. And he was back in the group by about April, I think it was, late April. Barry was back in the group. So I think where you see it, I think you have the homecoming the way it's been perceived. If you wanted to paint a picture, I think you've got Arn and Tully signed to return, and so I think you have your Halloween Havoc match happens the way it is, and I would hold Arn and Tully off until around Starrcade when you've got your impact. Some sort of mess is happening. Flair and Sting are being attacked by your Funks and your Mutas and your Dragon Masters, that heel side of it, and Tully and Arn are going to come out together. So instead of just Arn and Ole, it becomes Tully and Arn hitting the ring to clear them out. And of course, Ole has been seconding Flair, so now you have the original four horsemen in the ring together. And so when you come to post Starrcade, where you had the storyline of Sting being inducted. You don't need to induct Sting, but you've got this initial premise that perhaps Arn and Tully, like the Horsemen, are good guys because Flair has been the good guy. They've come to Flair's aid. I think there's your foundation of the groundwork for the future. Okay. Ole initially there, but he's not going to work in ring because Tully is back. And you can still do the whole, Sting is still friends with Flair. They're still allies, but they're not, here's this interview. Ole sort of says, look what's back. Look what happens when you have the return of the greatest tag team in the world, and they can hold their four fingers up, and you just have this great promo. And then, they talk about how, Flair is the champ and Tully and Arn are going to regain the tag titles, remembering that, the tag titles are now around the waists of the Steiner brothers. So you don't say that they're going for the Steiners. Just, we're going to regain the tag titles and Flair is going to be the champion forever. Knowing that Sting has been announced that because he won Iron Man, he's going to get a shot.
Right.
So you don't have to do that. And maybe they can even invite Sting out and shake his hand and thank him. Flair can thank him for being by his side for the while Tully and Arn were away. You stood by me, and I appreciate that. I want to shake your hand and thank you. The Horsemen thank you. Shake hands, bang. You can leave it there, and then you've got your announcement of the Clash of Champions event, which they announced that it's going to be Muta and Dragon Master, and was it Dick Slater or whoever is working with them, and Flair says, look, Sting, I've appreciated all you've done, but Tully and Arn are going to be with me out there. They're gonna help me. And you have your match, and maybe in the middle of the match, Sting can still come out. Maybe the numbers are getting on top of the Horsemen, and Sting comes out to help them post match maybe, and maybe we harken back to sort of, I think it was Starrcade '86 with Dusty. You can almost harken back to what happened there, because Dusty came out to save Flair. You've got this idea that maybe Flair, Tully and Arn have been fighting on the outside of the ring, and maybe Muta's walloping Flair in the ring, and Sting comes out and chases Muta away, and he stands in the ring, and he's there, and Flair's looking up at him on the ground, and Sting reaches his hand out to shake, and maybe the way he puts his hand out to shake looks like he's holding up 4 fingers like the Horseman. And Tully and Arn see this on the outside, and they slide into the ring, and they're behind him. And Sting sits, and Flair gets to his feet, and they're just looking at each other. And Sting thinks, it's okay. I've helped you. I'm here. I'm your friend. And Tully and Arn just attack him from behind. And Flair lays in, and you have the heel turn of Tully and Arn and Flair working him over in the ring to begin that build. And you could have Ole post-match saying, a true friend would never have signed to face the champ, right? The Horsemen are friends. You're just an obstacle, something like that.
Mm-hmm. Well, what you're thinking of actually was the prelude to Starrcade '85. It was that September in the cage.
'85, right? Yes.
When Flair was wrestling Nikita Koloff, and Dusty chased off the Koloffs, and then Arn, Tully, and Ole came in and beat the crap out of Flair. Beat the crap out of Dusty. So that was that was the end of September '85, going into Starrcade '85.
And I think that sort of it's enough. You can harken, the commentators, the long-term fans, they're going to remember that happened, and so it just creates that connection of who the Horsemen are.
I think definitely need to push. Sting is the guy. Sting is the number one. Sting is the number one babyface as we're going into 1990. That's no doubt. He is the man. He is the one being pushed. Fitting that both members of the Blade Runners were being pushed as the number one babyfaces in both major promotions. Let's keep that in mind. Some people may not think about that, but that is, Rock and Blade, or whatever the hell their names were, both being pushed at the same time. One guy would win the belt in April. The other guy would win the belt in July. I think that's exactly what you do. You need to establish Tully and Arn are firmly back in their in their positions, and they're looking at Flair going, we're back. We don't need these interlopers. And keep in mind, Rick, this guy's got a title shot. And we don't do friends and friends. That's not how we work. The friend of our friend, the enemy of our enemy is our friend, but anybody going after you is our enemy. And Dusty was in that same case 5 years earlier because, he'd gone for the title shot at Starrcade 84. Him and Flair kind of became friends in it's the similar situation because him and Flair became friends in 85 when Tully was a heel in 84 going against with him and Wahoo, and that kind of bled into 85. And then they became cousins, the cousins and all that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I pretty much think you hit the nail on the head. You reestablish, whether it's early in the year, Capital Combat or whatever, early in 90, and you hope that Sting doesn't blow his knee out. Now, in our world here in this alternate universe, Dave, does Sting blow his knee out? We don't get him for 5 months.
I don't. Well, I think the scenario we've created here is there's not the need for, because Sting's not coming to climb the cage to get at the Horsemen. In this case, the Horsemen have been working together, and Sting is coming out at the end a little bit more as sort of to save Flair. So he doesn't need to climb the cage to get in.
He can go through
open
the door.
He can go in the door.
Excellent point.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
Excellent
so the
point.
knee doesn't go. And I think where you go very, very quickly, you need to establish the return of the Horsemen here in a big way. So while you're building to now, the question is whether you put Sting against Flair at Capital Combat, or if you hold it off until Wrestle War or the Bash. But I don't think you do the Luger interlude. I think what you want to do, I would have the Sting Flair match earlier than Great American Bash. But what I would be doing is very, very quickly, I'd be getting the tag titles back on Tully and Arn. I think Tully and Arn defeat the Steiner brothers, and whether it be at Capital Combat, at pay-per-view, whether it be on television, I would get those titles back on the Horsemen as quick as you can. To not in a way of, this is not about the Horsemen coming back from WWE. They were champions there, or is that bigger, or we got to hold them back because they're up there. No, for me, it's about the dominance of the Horsemen was when they held the titles, and if you bring it back to this idea of they've got the gold, they become that top faction, that top group. I think where the 1990 version of the Horsemen did falter a little bit, Ole was a bit old. He and Arn were doing the tag matches for a while, but you just didn't see them as the top tag team. The Steiners had really taken control. But can you imagine Tully and Arn steal the titles from the Steiners, and the Steiners spend the next 6 months chasing them, trying to get them back, building to some big return match where the Steiners regain those titles. I think that would just be a tremendous. You could have Tully and Arn, the Steiners. Can you imagine the four of them in the ring? That would be just tremendous. So I would, get the titles back on Tully and Arn quickly, so that you've got that dominance. But then Flair's going to lose. Yeah, I would do that. I would. This is what I would probably do. I would have that, and Flair keeps the title against Sting in their first match at Capital Combat by DQ when the Horsemen interfere. Tully and Arn jump the ring, interfere. Sting doesn't win the title there, which leads to the rematch with the Horsemen either in a cage or banned. I mean, I know it sounds similar to the Luger thing, but you need to you want to build it up, because what I want is in that process, while you're waiting to get to the second match, is when Barry returns.
Mhm.
and almost instantaneously you get the US title back on Barry.
Right.
So the
Yep.
Horsemen hold all the gold until Wrestle War, where Sting beats Flair, and now Flair is beltless. And Tully, Barry, and Arn all have titles.
Never saw that. That was very rare. Yeah. Yeah, obviously with what we have, the timeline moves up and the timeline moves up and Sting's not hurt and uh Barry is firmly back in. So who suffers from the primary timeline to the alternate? Obviously, the number one primary guys that get kind of boned in this scenario is Doom, because they lose they're not the top heel tag team anymore, because you got Tully and Arn, and maybe Doom down the line, maybe they get into a US US tag title situation.
Yeah, mate, you can work Doom around stuff, because obviously, early 1990, the Road Warriors are still around. The feud with the Skyscrapers has died because everyone got hurt. So you could farm Doom off to be a challenge to the Road Warriors before they jump ship and head north. So you could sort of get them off to the side, and maybe Doom give the Warriors a loss on the way out the door, and that primes you for Doom for later in the year.
True. Yeah, that's a fine idea.
The other big loser is Lex Luger.
Well, yeah, I don't
because
think
he was US champ. I know, but
people.
Yeah, but getting the belt off, if I'm taking the belt off him and putting it back on Barry, Luger is a bit of he's not in the title picture anymore, and now, I think there's a way around that, because where I would go, so you've got the title on Flair, and maybe Flair has a couple of rematches on TV and he can't win. And maybe Luger slots into the Great American Bash against Sting, and he and Sting can be separated. But what I think you then can start to have happen is either Flair loses some rematches and announces he's just going to take some time off to allow some injuries to heal, or he just starts appearing in the corner of the others.
Mm-hmm.
But what you start to have happen here is that the rest of the Horsemen start talking about how they have the gold. That they are, you can start bringing some of the pettiness into the group of, especially without JJ around. You haven't got the unifying force. So now, Flair doesn't have the title. We don't want to talk about Flair at the moment. We have an interview segment, and Jim Ross or whoever is asking questions about Flair, and Tully might be, no. Let's talk about Arn and my title shot or title match at Great American Bash, or Barry's like, look, Rick's doing Rick's thing at the moment, but I want to talk about my match at Great American Bash. And so you start this premise of maybe Flair's no longer the top dog. Maybe we're getting a little bit of a vying for who's in charge now that Flair doesn't have a title. And I think over the course of the year, what you could do is you could have maybe, the different guys start getting the shots at Sting. Barry gets a shot at Sting. Tully gets a shot at Sting. And where I'm heading is, I think at the back end of the year, you could have this moment where, because we know the fans love Flair. You have this moment where Tully, I always think this would be something Tully would do. Tully is basically starting to rise up as, no, the Horsemen are mine. I'm the top dog. Rick, you're out of here. And maybe the Horsemen turn on Flair. Tully, Arn, and Barry turn on Flair and boot Flair out.
Could you imagine? Wow, Dave. Of all the glass looking we've done over our 2.5 years, that one I almost don't think I could even believe in an alternate universe. Flair's the odd man out. Could you imagine? And then Sting looks at him like, "Hey, not my fault. I got the gold, bitch." and Sting's on an island. The heels don't respect him. The faces don't trust him. He's on an island. Then we don't get the Black Scorpion, thank God. No. But that's what a fascinating thing about it. The heels look at it. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, you go. The heel. You finish.
I was going to say the heels look at him and go, "Well, you're not. If your own faction doesn't respect you, what do we get? Who the hell you think you are telling us what to do? You've got nothing. You're just a guy in a suit." Sting's the boss. He's the one with the gold, and your guys think you're pretty much nothing. So, what do you want from us? You know?
And I'd almost look at this is how I would love to have seen. This is just mine. And part of this is I always felt Tully was such a good heel. Maybe Tully and Arn have lost the top. Yeah, as I said, later in the year, Steiners are probably going to win the tag titles back from Tully and Arn. But at this point, Tully starts eyeing off Sting. He wants a shot at Sting. And so, as I said, Tully sort of starts to step up. And maybe it's Tully who, maybe Tully shockingly ends Sting's title reign at Starrcade. Maybe Tully is a shock winner of the title, but having booted Flair out, you then can build to Tully versus Flair for the title. Flair with the fans behind him, and Tully, in my mind, the ultimate heel. He was just
totally
the perfect heel.
Totally.
And probably at this point, maybe Barry has, he's probably dropped the US title as well, and maybe he's doing something else. And Arn's caught in the middle. Tully and Flair, where does Arn sit? Maybe Arn was part of the premise of booting Flair out, but the minute these two start going at it, Arn feels caught in the middle a little bit. Who's he going to side with? Where's he going to lie as Tully and Flair start to battle for the title? And whether that's perhaps a Super Brawl moment, 91, maybe Tully chases Flair out of the company in 91. We know that Flair heads north. And a lot of that was around the title, but I'm wondering if the storyline that we're presenting here has got, Flair's still working with the people he trusts and relies on, and helping put Tully over. Flair might be more willing to stay around for a little bit longer. But you could build up to a big match between Flair and Tully for the title, and Arn there at ringside, and is he gonna side with Tully? Is he gonna side with Flair? There's your storyline. Who wins could be all down to who does Arn side with.
That is true. That is very true. Who was the TV champion at the time? Because Luger could kick that guy around.
Arn took the title from Muta and held it for a while, and then it ended up, I think, around Tom Zank and Bobby Eaton, and of.
Well, obviously, if Arn and Tully are tag champs, Arn doesn't need to be TV champ. So if Luger needs the ultimate consolation prize, you could end up have him with the TV belt at some point down the line. I think that's fantastic, and I like the whole Flair's on an island, and he spends 1990 trying to get Sting's trust, trying to get the babyface's trust, Luger's trust, and you know, uh, um, see, the problem is, do we eventually get Stan Hansen somewhere? Maybe Stan Hansen still feuds with Luger, except it's for the TV belt, and maybe there's matches like Halloween Havoc and Flair.
Imagine Stan Hansen feuding with Barry Windham.
Interesting. Now Barry Windham would be Barry be the heel and Stan Hansen would be the face, because obviously in the primary world it was the reverse with Luger. That would be very interesting.
Yeah, I mean Stan Hansen, he was popular in Japan. If he just beats Stan Hansen and they put him against a heel, he'll be cheered. Like that, it's like Terry Gordy and Dr. Death Steve Williams. It just came down to who they were fighting to whether the fans would be on their side or go against them.
Right. That's true.
Because their character and their in-ring style never changed, regardless of whether they were, faces or heels. Just never changed.
Right. I like that, Dave. I agree with that 100%. I think that would be a lot of fun. I actually like the psyche. What psychology we could go with throughout 90, where Flair is trying to prove himself to the faces, saying, look, and the face is like, yeah, you're just coming here to beg because your boys kicked you out because you're a loser. You're a loser, Rick. And he's trying to prove I'm still Ric Flair, but your guys think you're a stiff. You were holding them back. They were the ones holding the gold, not you. Sting ain't gonna trust you. You can thank us for that. And Luger, you stabbed him in the back a few times. Like, Luger's on an island, and eventually Luger, or not Luger, I'm sorry, Flair's on an island. Flair maybe helps the Steiners win back the tag titles. Like, it could be fascinating how the psyche. So we're actually taking a great faction and giving it a very different spin.
Yeah.
A very different spin. I like that, Dave. That's very good. And I feel like it even strengthens Sting as the top babyface, that Flair's looking at him like, look, man, you stabbed me in the back and I beat you, so I don't need you for nothing. I'm sorry that your friends kicked you out. That's your problem. You work it out. I got my own fish to fry. He's feuding with Stan Hansen, or he's feuding with Sid, or whatever's going on with Sting, Vader. I don't know. Was Vader around in 90? Yeah, I think he was.
He debuted during 90.
Yeah, he had come from Japan. So Sting's got all these other heels going after him, and he's looking at Flair like, I don't have time for you. Look, you made your bed. You got to lie in it. I got no time for you. And that's all what the baby faces are going to do. And the heels are looking at him like, Ric Flair, this isn't 1985, dude. You ain't calling the shots anymore for us. I think it's amazing. That is amazing. Now, you have a second Horseman scenario.
Yes, well, we'll leave this mirror universe and we'll go through another looking glass, and we're going to jump to 1993. And of course, Flair had returned to WCW after his amazing run, 18-month run with Vince and the WWF. Oh, sorry, He Who Shall Not Be Spoken Of, and the WWF. And we had that big crescendo. They were building for weeks and weeks. They announced that the Clash of Champions was going to be the return, the reunion, the reformation of the Four Horsemen. And Flair is there with Arn, having been doing the Flair for the Gold segments, and they introduced Ole as part of the reunion, and then they introduced the newest Horseman. The styling, and how does Flair put it? The styling and profiling, pretty Paul Roma. And I love that. Those of you who have the Four Horsemen DVD, I love Triple H's comment about Paul Roma being chosen as a horseman. He's got what? The job guy from WWF? It's a
Yep.
classic. It's a classic line, and yeah, the biggest letdown in company history. And so the question has to be asked: who else could have filled the role? Is there someone better, and could it have worked better? Because in the end, Roma and Anderson had a little run as a tag team, but really Roma was never a proper horseman. Never felt like it. They never really functioned as the horseman. So is there a better option than Paul Roma, who formed the Four Horsemen in 1993? Now, having just, I don't want to spend too long on this, but having just spoken about what we did in sort of 90, it's very easy to turn around and go, well, everyone knows that they approached Tully. They wanted Tully to sign in 93, and it was a financial issue. They couldn't come to terms on a contract. But Tully was supposed to be the one who appeared, and Tully was supposed to be the one who was going to make a return. So it's very easy to go, Tully, bring Tully back. And yes, you could do that. You could bring Tully back. It would be easy.
Totally.
It would be easy. And let me just throw out, I mean, you could almost run a similar scenario. If Tully comes back, you've got a similar scenario to what happened, what we just described with a 1990 option. Tully is back, and maybe initially you get a 6-man match at the Clash of Champions instead of fighting the Blondes for the tag titles. Maybe it's the Blondes and Steven Regal versus Tully, Arn, and Rick. Imagine that in ring, 6-man battle would be awesome. And then Tully and Arn can start a series with the Hollywood Blondes, and you can have the tag title there. And you've got this massive build. The year could pretty well go the same for Flair. And you're building to Starrcade. And in Starrcade, you've got, you have the whole incident in England with Arn, and Arn disappears for a while, and Flair faces Vader, wins the title, has his rematch, and the whole time he's doing this, Tully has been supporting him. Tully's been in his corner because he's the last horseman standing. And Flair wins the title and retains the title at Super Brawl against Vader in 94. And Hogan's not here yet. And then Tully turns around and basically, you could do the interview after Flair has retained the title against Vader, and Tully basically looks at him and goes, "What about me? Where's my shot? I've been behind you the whole way." And boom, he turns on Flair then and there, and you can build to a Flair Tully match, which Flair would keep the belt here, but you give Tully that moment in the sun before Hogan shows up. You could have Flair keep the title against Tully, have a couple of pay-per-view matches against Tully. Then he could have his Steamboat match, and then you do the Sting incident, and then you've got Hogan coming in. But that's the easy thing to do. It's very easy. But if Tully doesn't return, and Roma's not quite, you got something you want to throw in?
I do want to throw something in because I think I'm going to take your thunder here because I was about to ask you. Let's say Tully's doesn't come back. I have another thought.
Yep.
I know you want to have a good feud with the Blondes, but I think Steve Austin would be a damn good horseman.
Oh.
So they're on. It's almost like we almost do the Seth Rollins in 2014. The Hollywood Blondes are sitting there. They're about to get laughed at. And Flair announces who the newest horseman is. And Steve turns around and beats the shit out of Brian Pillman. Like Seth Rollins turned on Ambrose and Reigns in 2014. He was in the Dangerous Alliance, so he's a good faction guy. Clearly, Austin needs that extra push if they're ever going to make him a main event guy, if Bischoff ever gives a shit. And maybe having him in the Horsemen gives Austin a little extra pub in the upper main event scene that he doesn't get in the primary world.
Oh.
And you build him. He does eventually win the U.S. title. I know he does it in 94 anyway, but he's managed by Colonel Rob Parker, and he's a good heel, but unfortunately gets kind of mired in the miasma. But if you make him as a Horseman and take your storyline and eventually build him up and give Austin some kind of a little self-confidence and some self-esteem moving up, and eventually you give him a main event shot. Maybe not at Starrcade. Maybe at Halloween Havoc. Or we're going before Hogan comes in, maybe Super Brawl in February 94.
Yeah. Oh, I like. So the question I've got to ask there is, it sounds like if Austin's going to turn on Pillman, it sounds like you're positioning that the Horsemen are going to be heels, that Flair and Anderson are essentially going to turn heel in the process of reuniting the Four Horsemen. Is that your sort of picture to start with?
Yeah, kind of.
Because if that's the case, let me throw this out.
Sure.
Why have Austin turn on Pillman
because he's standing there?
When both of them could join the Horsemen. So let me take it a different step. You've got the Flair for the gold. You've got Flair and Anderson doing the Flair for gold, and you've had Pillman and Austin come on for a couple of weeks doing their. They did the interviews that we saw, the mocking interviews about their age and about how old and decrepit. And then you have Austin and Pillman do their spoof of the.
My favorite one is when my favorite one will always be when Pillman goes, "Look at that old statue over there." That's Double A. Oh, yeah. That always made me laugh.
So the premise is that these guys are. It looks like we're building to the feud. As everything's been talked about, we're building to the feud. And then maybe, at the same time, you've got the undercurrent of Sting against Vader and Davey Boy Smith's there. And so maybe one day they're interviewing Sting and Davey Boy Smith. Flair for the gold. They're interviewing Sting and Davey Boy Smith. And, and they're going to do the announcement, or maybe you're doing this at the Clash of Champions. We've promised the Horseman reunion, and let's bring it back to that. We promised the Horseman reunion, and Sting's on as Sting's brought out, and everyone thinks, oh, Sting's a former Horseman, and Sting says, yes, I'm not in the Horseman. I'm a former Horseman. I'm just here. He's dressed up, but he's been brought out as, maybe they've brought out a couple of ex-Horsemen. So Ole gets brought out. We're reuniting the Horsemen, Flair says. And so we're going to introduce some past Horsemen. Out comes Ole Anderson, in his tuxedo, and Ole talks about when he was a Horseman. And then they bring out Sting, and Sting acknowledges, look, Rick, you guys you asked me to be a Horseman, but you got me. And but that's in the past. I was honored to be a member of the Horsemen, even if it was just for a couple of days, whatever it is. And so you've got this premise being put out there. And then, Flair sort of says, okay, well, we've promised that the Horsemen are going to ride again, and we want to introduce you to the newest member of the Horsemen. Just leave it like they're going to bring out one person. And all of a sudden, Pillman and Austin come out. And they're not dressed up, but they come out and they're doing their mocking thing. Oh, here we go. You're old, and the Horsemen are old, and we don't care. Why are we doing this? This is a waste of time. And Ole can talk about them being disrespectful and they should go. And they, Ole, you're even older than them. And, so Sting and Austin and Pillman are just doing it, running what they've been doing with the old gags and and it looks like everything, and Sting, and maybe Davey Boy's come out because it looks like they're starting to get in Sting's face, and you're not even a part of this, Sting. Why don't you just leave? And so you're facilitating this little bit of talking chaos, and maybe Sting and maybe Austin and Pillman push. They're pushing Sting, they're pushing Davey Boy, they're giving them the shove away, get out of our face, and they push him back. And they're going head to head. And at that moment, Anderson gets up and Flair, and they jump Sting and Davey Boy. And the four of them, Pillman, Austin, Anderson, and Flair, beat down Sting and Davey Boy, at which point Flair stands up and pronounces Austin and Pillman are the newest members of the Four Horsemen, and the Horsemen are going to be greater than ever. It allows you to keep the blondes together.
True.
They've got the titles. Eventually, you could siphon them off, and you can build Austin as the singles guy, and Pillman and Anderson could do some teaming. And it allows you to build up later in the year, like you said, then down the track, because Flair's being Flair. Then you can do what we're talking about. Then you build Austin to the point that you are old Flair. I want that title. I'm not happy with just the US. I want the world title. And like you said, after Flair wins that title, and he's almost being seen as a bit of a good guy, and the what's happening with the Horsemen here, and then Austin, he guns for Flair. He wants that next step, and he steps up and takes on Flair. But the Horsemen become the thing. I just thought, if you want to bring Austin in, bring them both in.
Okay, fine with me. I agree with you 100% on that. Totally fine with that. I was just kind of, I think Austin's the one that's probably the more marketable down the line. And I love Pillman, but that's fine. I'm good with that. So there's our Horseman.
But let me throw another one out. I want to throw another one out just as this came to me as a thought. If Flair and Arn are good guys, and we're promoting this idea of a good guy faction, if you're trying to think who on the WCW roster as a baby face could maybe be a fit in terms of style, in ring, good worker, and would make for an interesting story, what if instead of bringing out Paul Roma, they announced that the newest member of the Horsemen was Dustin? And you bring out the son of the most hated rival of the Horsemen, and Dustin becomes the fourth Horseman for a while.
I don't know if I could. I don't know if that would that come off as completely believable. Maybe. Haven't seen Dustin as a babyface in I couldn't tell you how long. but I mean, as a heel.
Well, in '94, he'd been in the middle of a feud with Rick Rude. He was essentially until the arrival of Flair, he was the number 2 babyface behind Sting in the company in early '94. He was being groomed. You could see he was being groomed for a higher position. I just thought it'd be interesting. You've got you bring out Dustin as a good guy. He's a upper mid card guy. He was feuding for the US title. You could play into the history. Flair and Arn could acknowledge the history. We battled your dad. We know how tough he was, and we have seen how tough you are. And this is the next generation of the Horsemen, coming together. What's happened in the past is in the past. Now, I'm not saying it's the greatest idea, but I just thought that could, for a baby face on the WCW roster at the time, would have been better than Paul Roma.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that would make. I could see that. I think it's just. I'm not saying Dustin would be a bad idea. He'd have to work a lot harder at it.
Yeah.
He'd have to work a lot harder at being a heel. So.
But he's not a heel because the Horsemen were baby faces. Because Arn and Flair were feuding with the Hollywood Blondes. And then Flair headed down the direction towards Starrcade to win the title from Vader. So they weren't heels at the time.
That is true. That'd be pretty interesting.
Because we get so caught up in the idea that the Horsemen were heels, but in '93, the Return of the Horsemen, they were a babyface faction, which is another reason why it didn't really work.
That's true. Yeah, all right. I could go with that. Leading to, and then maybe they eventually turn on Dustin in '94, like the Arn and the Stud Stable and all them did anyway.
Well, exactly. You've got when Flair is in the process of turning heel, so Flair could win the title from Vader as he did. Flair, when you are starting to build to the Hogan storyline, Flair does his slow heel transition. Initially, he fights Steamboat, and they're both baby faces, but Flair starts wrestling the heel persona again. Then he has the match against Sting, and that's when Sherry comes out and he turns heel, and then that's to build to Hogan. But it would be just as easy to do a Flair heel turn by his, the Horsemen, and yes, Arn's sort of out, but they've been working together. Dustin's been one of the Horsemen. Flair's won the world title. He stood by him, and then maybe because Dustin is still the US champ, it's the whole, you're the number one contender. And that's when it becomes Flair turning to him and going, it's either you're either a member of the Horsemen and you know your role and you stay the US champion, or you're out. And Dustin's like, you can't talk to me like that. And Flair beats the snot out of him.
Yep.
Heel turn, match, and then Dustin gets a title shot. He doesn't win, but he gets a title shot against Flair. And there's your heel turn for Flair in the build up to Hogan.
Interesting. All right. I'm good with that. I knew you were going to come up with a good way for Dustin. I like that idea. But there we go, folks. Multiple options in 1993, better than Paul Roma, which I think we all realized there were a ton of options better than Paul Roma. if you really thought about it. So there's our two versions of changing the Horsemen up a little bit in 1990 and 1993. All right, now we're going to go to one that unfortunately is not as luxurious or extravagant as our first example, because this this faction needed more than just one guy to help. But it's a fascinating one. It's a fascinating one because this one here may be more of a just lack of feasible talent. See, the difference between this example and our last example is Paul Roma was not the bee's knees when it came to guys you wanted to help out the Horsemen in 93. Unfortunately, this example, Paul Roma might have been an actually pretty good option compared to what we had otherwise. But go ahead, Dave. What do we got?
Well, I think quite literally we're going from the best faction of all time to possibly the worst, if not the worst, one of the worst. We're going to spend a few minutes talking about the $1 Million Corporation.
Ugh.
Yes,
Ugh.
Ted DiBiase's
Ugh.
$1 Million Corporation, formed in 1994. Somehow it made it through to 95. Don't ask me how. And just, nothing of note, nothing. It was just a fizzer. And I think it's interesting because I think this is going to be a good chance for us just to have a quick look at. I think part of the problem I think there are two key problems with this faction. Well, okay, there are three key problems. One of the problems was booking.
Mm-hmm.
That's the role of this podcast. We talk about that
Right.
anyway.
Of course. Yep.
The second problem was, as you just alluded to, the nature of the WWF roster in 94 and 95. It was very weak, and so it made it very difficult to put together some form of power stable.
Mm-hmm.
The final issue I have with the $1 Million Corporation, and I think this would be a good chance to talk a little bit about this concept, is I think it was how it was brought together is an issue. Now, when you look at stables through history, the better stables, the stables that have really been at the top of the game, have been at the pinnacle of the business, are normally formed around a key player. The Horsemen were formed around Ric Flair. Ric Flair was the centerpiece of the Horsemen. We've talked about that. He was the top of the table. He was the pinnacle. The Dangerous Alliance in 1992, late 91 and early 92, were formed around Rick Rude. He was the pinnacle. He was the centerpiece of the company.
Mm-hmm.
You fly through into the Attitude Era, the Nation of Domination. Initially, it was Farouk, and then it was The Rock. That they were formed around this guy. And the story continues to today. The Bloodline was formed around Roman Reigns. And we even talked at the top of the episode about Judgment Day. And the formation of Judgment Day was around Edge. So every key faction tends to form around a key player. But that's not what happened with the $1 Million Corporation, because the $1 Million Corporation formed, the first member was Nikolai Volkov. I mean, we talked about Paul Roma. I mean, Volkov hadn't been relevant in the company since 1985. And here we are 9 years later in 94, and he's the first member. Then the next two members are IRS. Now, granted, IRS had a long history with DiBiase. That made sense, but he was nothing more than a lower mid-card guy. And Bam Bam Bigelow. Now, on this podcast, we've talked a lot about how good Bam Bam can be. But by mid to late 94, Bam Bam was on his way down in the WWF. He'd already had his run with Brett in 93, and he was really heading down the charts. So this group formed around no one. I mean, the focal point was a manager, really, the $1 Million Man. So I guess the question needs to be, if you had formed the $1 Million Corporation around a key player to start with, could they have been more important, have had a greater impact? Is there a player that could have been the centerpiece of the $1 Million Corporation that, when you think back on it, it was like that was who elevated them? That was who was the main event player in the group. I think that's where you've really got to start with this unit, because even when they finally had someone who you could consider the top guy, and that's Sid, he wasn't really even presented in that way when he joined the corporation. He played the bodyguard role briefly to Shawn, And while he came in and feuded with Diesel, sort of, it really wasn't. He wasn't presented as he's the pinnacle. He's the diamond of the $1 million corporation. He was just one of the guys in the corporation. So, yeah, that's what I see as the issue with the corporation and why it didn't work. So if we go back to how you create this team, this unit, is there someone in 1994 either on the company's roster or maybe not necessarily on the roster, but you could bring in who could be the centerpiece that you could, form this faction around?
Yeah, I mean, the problem was, if you go back through history, a decent hunk of great heel factions were usually main event, top of the line, top level. The Horsemen. For the most part, the Dangerous Alliance. I mean, 92... Yeah, because it was Sting in the Squadron, and then Sting didn't really start feuding with Vader till the summer after the Alliance kind of disbanded a little bit. You go to 1994 WWF, and you've got the heels are Yoko. He's the top heel. Here was the problem. The $1 Million Corporation was not built as the main event faction. They were built as mid-card scrubs because the face of heels in the WWF in 93 and 94, even into 95, was Yoko. The problem was Yoko, of course, was starting to get a little too much Yoko-ish. Brett and Diesel at the time, before Diesel turned face, were the big heels.
Shawn and Diesel.
Of course, Brett was the face. Diesel, I guess you could say, turned face pretty much by, obviously, when he won the belt in November. So the problem is, the corporation were always built as mid-card fodder. And by the time we get to WrestleMania 11 and Diesel beats Shawn, and now we're looking at new heels for Diesel to defend the WWF title, the corporation's already a bunch of scrubs, and Sid is not treated as the face of the faction. It's just DiBiase and a bunch of bums. And even when, like, Tatanka turned in 94 on Luger and joined the corporation, because the big thing was Luger joining the corporation, like, you'd think that would have been a big deal. And honestly, it really wasn't.
No. It felt flat as anything.
Right.
Because
so
Tatanka he'd lost his steam by 94. He was just another guy.
Yep. And what it comes down to is, by the time the corporation needed to be the face of the heels in the WWF, they were already being perceived as a bunch of stiffs. And there was just no... Shawn had turned babyface, so he was gone. Brett was a babyface. You had a strong amount... You had Taker was a babyface.
Everyone was
Davey
a babyface.
Boy was a babyface. Davey Boy was a babyface. He wouldn't turn heel till the back end of the year, and by then the corporation would be crap, and we'd start getting the building of Camp Cornette.
Yeah.
Which was infinitely infinitively, if I just made up a word, was unbelievably a much better heel faction in '96 because you had Vader, Owen, Davey Boy, guys that fans respected. Yeah, they may have hated, but you bet your ass they respected. Whereas by '95, I don't know what you do. The problem was when they got Sid, when Sid joined the corporation, he was just treated like another guy. He was not, they were just a bunch of stragglers. Whereas they should have galvanized behind Sid and Sid be the face. Now, Sid's promo skills are fucking abysmal. So, which is why you have DiBiase. So the problem was, on top of there not enough talent, they didn't reflect what needed to be reflected in terms of the strength of the faction, which is they needed to make Sid the face of it.
Yeah.
And I contend that maybe you have Sid beat Diesel at In Your House 1. Hold it for a couple of months. Maybe to SummerSlam. Forget the Mabel stuff because that's just I don't even want to get into that. And then maybe you have a Sid Diesel rematch at SummerSlam in Pittsburgh, and Diesel wins it back. Yeah. I don't get why Diesel had to hold it for an entire because Vince thought he was the next Hogan, but Vince was on crack.
But Vince also liked Sid. I mean, he brought him in originally because he thought he was going to be the next Hogan.
Right.
So, and yeah, I could actually see. Imagine like if you played it that post WrestleMania, DiBiase talks up. I've purchased the diamond. I've been building my corporation, but I've now got the diamond of the team. I've got the best of the best. I finally signed the man to lead my corporation to the top. Acknowledging what everyone else already acknowledges, that the rest of them are scrubs. And then he brings out, like you said, Sid. He does the talking for Sid. I've already signed him, I've already signed him to a title match. Diesel, you won't know what's hit you. And like you said, at the first In Your House, with the help of corporation members, they could run in ref bump, they could run in, beat up on Diesel, and Sid gets, a very cheap win over Diesel. You've made him a player from the start. You've made him a top guy right at the beginning. DiBiase then is talking about, here it is. I've got the champ now. I'm in charge. Diesel can, I've got a rematch clause. I mean, you could do the rematch. Yeah. I mean, look, you could rematch him at King of the Ring. I mean, it doesn't have to be a long title run. You could switch it back at King of the Ring if you wanted, but you've established Sid at the top there by giving him that title right from the start. And I think you're right there. I think if you'd done that, you at least are making the corporation relevant. You're making them relevant for the rest of the year, because then it's about, can Sid either hold the title or regain it once he loses it? And then around him are a couple of, like, if he's holding the title, you do it old school heel fashion. He wins the title. He keeps it at King of the Ring because the corporation interfere. Then maybe at the next In Your House, you do a tag team or a multi-man match. Because by this point, Sean's babyface. So you could have Diesel and Sean against Sid and Tatanka, or you could even throw in Bam Bam on the good side. Bam Bam may have turned by now. And so, you have a 6-man match. You've got those options to play with. And again, the corporation keep helping him out. And then at SummerSlam, maybe it's a cage match. We want the title in the cage, and that's how Diesel regains the title. Or Sid holds it until you want to put it on Sean or Brett again, or you want to put it back on Brett, and Brett takes the title to WrestleMania to face Sean. You've got a couple of options there. I think that would definitely make the corporation relevant, just by altering how you're presenting one man.
Yeah, exactly. I think that was the problem. You weren't there wasn't any more real jewels unless you found somebody, unless you found
I've got
somebody.
a couple of options. I'll give you a couple of options in a minute. We'll come back to that in a minute. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's definitely, I agree with you 100%, Dave. The biggest problem with the $1 million corporation was perception. When they brought Sid in, that's where they should have focused on it. Now, I don't know what Mr. Perfect's condition was, but he was a guy that could have been a jewel. Because he kind of comes back in 96 anyway. And then he leaves and obviously goes to WCW because Vince wasn't going to use him anymore. I'm curious your other options because I got to be honest, I'm blanking.
Well,
Sid was the big. You weren't going to move Yoko.
No.
Because by 95, Yoko was with Owen. He was tag team champions. Cornette had his own little thing going on that would actually surpass DiBiase. But I'm curious your choices. I want you to give them to me because I have a feeling I'm knowing where you're going. But go ahead.
Well, the options to actually look at the formation, you actually need to drop back to 94 because DiBiase started recruiting in 94, and so Koloff and Bigelow and IRS joined in 94, and then Tatanka joined at SummerSlam 94. So they're building the corporation in 94. And so I looked at who's around. If you're looking for a diamond in company, because Sid wasn't there at this point, in company, you just mentioned Perfect. Now, Perfect had refereed the Luger match at WrestleMania that year, but he was still having his back issues. He was on his Lloyd's of London, and he didn't want to risk that yet. So that's why that never happened. So you take Perfect out of the equation. The only other option I see in the roster in 94 would be potentially Owen.
Mm-hmm.
Owen
I had a feeling you were going to say that.
Now, Owen had just started his feud with Brett. One way you could have done it was that Owen basically says something like, joins up with the corporation on the idea of this is my new family. Money is the key here, and they're my new family. And he has DiBiase managing him. The problem is I'm not sure that you're going to elevate Owen to the title in 94. Brett's only just regained it. He's got all the momentum. And their feud is ending at SummerSlam. You really can't, if you're putting Owen at the top of the game, you're just basically finishing his run with his brother just as he's joining the corporation. And that's not going to help the corporation's status, because Owen's going to be seen as a top guy, but he's not good enough to be the champ, will be the perception. So I just don't think Owen would work. So then I thought, well, what other options are out there? I came up with two thoughts of guys outside of the company who you could have brought in if you went with the plan of we're going to build a stable, we're going to build a faction, DiBiase will be the manager, we need a top guy. We're going to have to bring them in. I've got two options for that time period. You're looking at sort of somewhere between April and June 94 to bring someone in. The first option that came to my mind was Shane Douglas. Douglas was just hitting his stride as ECW champion, as the heel franchise character. And if you brought that franchise character into the WWF, it might have been something you could have worked with. Now, the drawback on Douglas is the NWA title tournament that really sort of solidified Douglas as the player in ECW and, when he throws the belt down and that whole interview, that doesn't happen till the end of August 94.
Right.
It's after SummerSlam. So again, you're looking at, I'm not sure that Shane Douglas has really cemented. He's growing into that franchise character, but I'm not sure it's really, he'd be big enough to come into WWF at the time. And how's this for an alternative?
Mm-hmm.
There is a man in another company who, in 94, I think if you threw some money at him, might have been willing to come to the WWF. And if you timed it right, it might have worked, because WCW had signed Hogan. Mm-hmm. Hogan started wrestling in ring in July, but the company started building around him in March. If you look at the television, the storylines, it's sort of on TV. They're sort of courting him in March 94. They're Mean Gene's interviewing him on set, but we know that he's already signed with the company, and Flair starts his heel turn in April.
Mm-hmm.
There is one guy who we know who would have known the minute Hogan was signed that his days in the company as a top guy were numbered, were finished. And I'm not talking about Ric Flair. I'm talking about the other Rick Rude. Rude knew Hogan did not want to have a bar of him. That goes back to their WWF days. Rude had been viewed as pretty well at the top of his game by April, May 94. He was feuding with Sting, and we know that at the end of May, he has the incident in Japan where he injures his back. But if you were to just sort of around WrestleMania throw enough money and say, hey, come on in, we want to form the $1 Million Corporation around you, you might have saved his career. I think if you'd done that with Rude knowing I'm about to be downsized because of Hogan, you might have been able to get the diamond at the start. I think Rick Rude is the one guy that you could have built the $1 Million Corporation around from the beginning that could have made them instant players. And I think it would have been an interesting pickup.
If they were able to pull it off and Rude was trusting to come back to WWF, I think that would have been a great idea.
You could picture it from the beginning. DiBiase can be talking about bringing in, he's bringing the diamond to the company. He's bringing the greatest wrestler in the world. I'm bringing him into the company. And you have Rude finish up in, he lost the title. He lost the international title to Sting in early May. And then he injured himself in the rematch that he won it back in Japan. So if you just sort of he dropped the title to Sting and went out the door, you could build it through TV. You could build for 4 or 5 weeks. He's coming. And then you could reveal him, maybe at King of the Ring. Maybe at one of the In Your Houses, you reveal that Rick Rude or actually In Your House started in 95. So either King of the Ring or at SummerSlam, you could have the big reveal that Rick Rude has arrived, and DiBiase is going to manage him. And then, DiBiase's already got a couple of pieces in place. He's got Tatanka and IRS and Bigelow to back Rude up, but Rude everything is built around him. And then you could actually push him into, you've got a ready-made spot, because Rude could go straight into matches with Brett, and he could face Brett at Survivor Series. Maybe, you're wanting to build the Shawn, you could have Rude win the title at the Royal Rumble and go into WrestleMania as the champ and face HBK at WrestleMania instead of having the two face guys and the Iron Man match. You could have Rude defend the title against Shawn Michaels at WrestleMania and have that as your elevation of Shawn Michaels. overcoming, the ravishing one. It's an interesting thought process there.
It is, and I like the looking outside the box at putting Rude in there. I think he's a guy Diesel would help. Diesel could get a good match for him. I think Rude could save it if you could get him. I mean, I don't know what his contract situation was. I don't know if Bischoff would have been easy to do that. Although at the time Hogan was the shiny toy, he probably could give a crap about the rest of the roster.
That's it. Rude would have known he would. Rude, I don't know how long Rude would have lasted in WCW, even if he hadn't got hurt, because
right,
he would have. Flair was about to be transitioned over to. He was being transitioned over to heel, so Rude's no longer the number one heel. He's not the number two heel because, he wasn't the number one heel because he was number two behind Vader. Now at best he's going to be number three, and Hogan won't fight him. Hogan won't wrestle him because that was a well-known thing. Hogan didn't want to do business with Rude. He didn't trust him. So, Rude would have been looking at going, where do I go from here? I've got nothing left.
Right. It's true. And he probably would have needled Bischoff enough to get to just cut me loose, I like that idea. I was trying to not go too out of WWF to try to bail us out, but I think that's a good option. If Vince would have gone for it, if he really wanted the corporation to not be a hot mess of crap, because by the time we get into the back end of 95 is when Cornette starts building the camp. Yeah. And you've got the guys, you've got Davey Boy, you've got Owen, you've got Vader, you've got the respectable heels. Well, Vader joins the minute in early 96.
Even initially, Camp Cornette, you had Yoko, and that was because Cornette had been with Yokozuna as champion. So that made sense, and that's probably helped. That's probably partly why it worked, because you had the guys who were the top guys there. You had, like you just said, Yoko was that top heel for so long. Owen was a top heel, and Davey Boy had just become a top heel. So you had three guys that were seen as main event level, or could easily slot into that level because of the role they played in the company for the previous couple of years. Unlike the corporation, which was bringing in IRS and Tatanka and Nikolai Volkov.
Yeah. That's probably... Yeah, I don't know if... The sad thing is, I don't know... We look back on it, I don't even know if Vince even gave a shit if anybody took the corporation seriously. I think it was just something to slap together. But, Dave, those were great options. I like those a lot. Let us know what you think on our Facebook page when we post the show, and on our Podbean comments. Feel free to post on Podbean as well, and underneath the on our Twitter account. So, that was you made a lot of chicken salad out of that, Dave. Not to steal the quote from the great Ben Locke's show here on the network, but all right, the last one tonight. This is probably, I mean, it depends how long we go with this one, but this is an interesting one. We talked about my favorite factions, and this one goes down as obviously a top 5 faction for me. And this question is interesting. Because I never really thought about it when they ended, how to keep them. But that's what we're going to discuss now on our final glass to look through. Dave, set the stage.
Okay, so let's go from a bad faction back to another good one. And in 2005, we had a faction that was leading the company, leading WWE at the time, and we all know who that is. Those of you who know Scott know that he had had cases of these this faction all over his wall. I'm assuming.
I did.
And that is Evolution. And in 05, Evolution was in the process of self-destructing. You had, in 04, you'd had the babyface turn of Randy Orton when Evolution kicked Orton out. And then in late 04 and early 05, you had what I still consider possibly one of the greatest babyface turn storylines in the history of this company. And that's the turn of Batista and the elevation of Batista in the company. It was one of the greatest storylines, how they put that together, of turning a guy against a heel and getting the fans on his side. It was so well done. But of course, the impact of that is Evolution was down to Triple H and Ric Flair, which really was how it started. Triple H with his manager, Ric Flair. And they never really did anything beyond that. Evolution was done. It was dead. And the question would have to be, though, one of the great things about a lot of factions through time has been when guys leave, they get replaced, just like a football team. You lose your wide receiver or your running back, you bring in a new one, or you recruit a new one.
Correct.
We've seen that. We've already talked about that. The Horsemen did that. Luger was replaced by Wyndham. People would replace other members through time. It happened with other factions. So I asked the question, what if Batista and Randy Orton were replaced in 2005? So they've left, they've done their thing. We get through WrestleMania, and Triple H is looking to rebuild. What have I got to do? I'm going to rebuild Evolution. I'm going to come back. I'm still coming for you, Batista, but I'm going to have my backup. Are there guys on the roster or coming into the roster in 2005 that could have been made the replacement members for Evolution? I guess that's the key of this question. What if Evolution continued and Batista and Orton were replaced? And I think that makes it an interesting conversation, because you're not just bringing any two guys in, because Evolution had an image. They had a reputation. They were not just... It's not like you're just going to bring in Al Snow or or Billy Gunn, because they didn't fit the image. Evolution were great in ring. There was this concept of the guys that Batista and Orton, they were guys that could become the future of the business. Now, whether or not we choose guys we talk about might have elevated to that role is irrelevant. You're looking at guys who could have elevated into that role. So I like to throw it to you, Scott. Are there guys out there that you think could have been worthy of becoming members of Evolution in 2005?
It had to be guys that understood the philosophy of how Evolution worked. We're talking about guys that were serious, guys that were dedicated, guys that could be taken seriously, not just muscle. I've got a couple of guys, and if not somebody on the roster, then perhaps somebody they can get off the roster. I'm going to do what you did with Rick Rude and the Corporation. I don't know. Is there a guy who was around? And no, not Chris Masters. That would have been a terrible idea. No way.
I've got one name on the roster under contract with WWE in 2005.
Okay.
Who I could see potentially fitting the role. It's a guy who certainly everyone believed had a future in the business. It's a guy who could talk, and it's a guy who definitely for a while was being seen as a future player.
Mm-hmm.
And he made his main roster debut not long after WrestleMania 21. So he fits the time frame of when you'd be bringing someone in out of OVW. What about someone like Ken Kennedy? Or even keeping the name Ken Anderson? Not necessarily the Mr. Kennedy gimmick, but he's a guy who had size, who was good in ring, and who was seen to be a future player in the game, which is what Evolution was about. Do you think Kennedy could have been a possibility?
Yes. Yeah. I think if he minimized the arrogance aspect of it to the point where it's not comedic, then yes. I think he's good. I think he would have been amazing in ring. He would have been amazing in ring, and I think he would have been a good guy to be the new Orton, kind of the new like work rate guy. Yeah, if his mannerisms could stay non-comedic, where they're over the top, I think you could do that. Sure. He's a guy that had the charisma, but he needed to have. But to be an Evolution, you have to have kind of Evolution charisma, and to do that, you got to be taken a little more seriously.
But I think the advantage you have is you're bringing him in out of OVW the same way they sort of did. I know Orton and Batista both sort of made their main roster debut, but they really had been nothing. That Evolution was their bring. So you could bring him in from OVW. You don't have him already saddled with the Mr. Kennedy gimmick. You can bring him in and you can work from the start of a gimmick that is more, or a character that is more Evolution centered or more Evolution based. Confidence without being too over the top. The arrogance could come later. A bit of arrogance without being comedic. And I think the other thing that you've got working in your favor for him then is he had issues later on with the way he was perceived outside the ring. But if he is working and traveling with Hunter and Flair, and obviously primarily Hunter, from the moment he comes into the main company, are you minimizing other influences on him that might lead him down a different path? Are you creating a situation where he could become a trusted player because he's going to understand the real working of the business and what it takes to get to the top? It creates that possibility because he's not already gonna have had those comedic elements. The things you just talked about, you can actually prevent them from even being a part of who he is, and work it from the start.
Okay, all right, I like that idea. Would it be would a guy like Shelton Benjamin been too late?
There's another possibility too. I think Shelton, you could use that, especially on the back of the previous year. Shelton had given Hunter all he could take in the ring. You had that match on was it on Raw or the draft?
It was on Raw. Yep.
When Shelton really, like, they put on a good in-ring match, so Shelton could go in the ring, and it could be a way of, Shelton's character had definitely hit a ceiling. And if you brought him into Evolution, I think it could very well work in his favor. You could mold him up a little bit. That really sort of fits a little bit of where they had a guy on roster that could be elevated, and someone who is known. It would certainly. The question is, does Shelton have the charisma or the mic skills to fit the group?
Yeah, that's what I think. I think he's a guy that was very serious when he was in Team Angle. Mm-hmm. And I think he could be like that in Evolution, even after having the gimmick and everything. And then he's not saddled with his fake mom and all that kind of fucking crap. You could have made him a gold standard there, and he could start wearing the gold tights there instead of later on.
Oh, the gold standard in Evolution. Now that would you can just picture it. You can picture it. Here we go. I'm gonna throw an idea. Here we go. We're post WrestleMania. Hunter has lost the title. Batista is reveling in the glory, and you do a couple of backstage segments of Hunter and Rick talking about, we've got to regroup. We've got to come up with a plan to get that title back. We've got to work it out. We've got to rebuild Evolution to be the dominant force. So you could have a couple of weeks of them talking, and maybe they start scouting. Maybe you have a couple of matches of Benjamin where he's in these really good, solid in-ring matches, and then, as you might get a shot of maybe Flair and Hunter are up in the skybox, watching one of the matches, just sort of nodding and maybe even gently applauding. Maybe one week Ric Flair comes out to ringside to scout, or even Hunter is on guest commentary during. Maybe Shelton's wrestling a match and Hunter's on commentary talking about Batista the whole time, but every now and then noticing that was actually a really good move by Shelton. But if Shelton would just forget about the fans, he could be so much better. Like you could throw those sorts of little comments about that, Shelton would need to change to be a better wrestler. And then they could even make the approach, maybe on maybe a backstage approach. Flair comes up, just, we've been watching you, and we think a lot of you, and we'd love you to think about whether or not, I would like to offer my services to help you. You could have that going. And so maybe the rematch, the Batista rematch at the next pay-per-view, you've got this moment where Batista's getting on top, and and Hunter is about to lose the match because he lost all three matches. So instead of him losing clean in the second match, you have Shelton Benjamin comes running out while after a ref bump, and he interferes, formally allying himself with Hunter and Flair. And so from there he becomes that third man. And so Batista can have a couple of matches with Shelton Benjamin on Raw in the build up to the Hell in the Cell match, and you can sort of get the ball rolling from there. And maybe at the same time, maybe the next night, so Benjamin formally joins, sort of turns heel, and then the next night they're out in the ring, and they can do that old school. This is the new evolution of Evolution. We're reaching a new standard. I give you the gold standard, and then out comes Shelton Benjamin as the gold standard. And then Flair and Hunter can say, but we're not stopping there. We've looked at, we've looked around the world, and we found a man who we believe is worthy to be in this group. And they could introduce however they want to call him, Ken Kennedy, Ken Anderson, whatever they want to do. They could bring him out as the fourth member. We've recruited him. He's the star recruit. Everyone was trying to recruit this guy. Everyone wanted to sign him because they see the potential this guy could be. This is the number one draft pick, and they bring out Kennedy as so you've got the gold standard and the number one draft pick working with the game and the nature boy, and you run from there.
Now, here's my outside the box. You ready? This will blow your mind.
Bring it on.
Say they decide, you know what? There's really nobody on the roster currently that would be fitting for Evolution at the moment. But he goes to Vince and he goes, I've got a guy. Trust me. There's a guy I like. I think his contract's up in another promotion. I think he'd be perfect. Put him here. We'll build him. We'll grow him. He'll be a stud. AJ Styles. He's a guy. He doesn't need to cut any promos. You know, Vince hates the whole Southern twangy shit because Vince is an idiot. But that's a guy. You get him out of that whole Vince Russo sex, whatever that shit was in 03 and 04, and clean him off from that stink. And he goes, we want to take over this company again. We want to call the shots. And we've decided there's just so little here, we had to go outside the box. And Triple H decides to give somebody a title shot that night. I'm sorry, he's not champion anymore. Batista has a non-title match against somebody, Flair or whatever. I don't know, something. And AJ comes out of the blue through the crowd and takes out Batista in that match, even if it's non-title. And suddenly, you've got this young, moldable guy, kind of like you did with Rude, although he's not moldable. Rude was a stud. Rude, but you bring in a guy from the outside that kind of helps build and grow, and he's molded the WWF way, and he could be a guy that maybe gives Cena a run for his money as a guy that the company eventually could work around.
Absolutely. Oh, that'd be.
I think Triple H would trust that. I think Triple H could trust him. It's just he would have to get Vince to trust him.
Absolutely, that would be amazing to bring AJ in. I mean, just the work rate that he brings. I mean, look, we just have to look at what he did when he did finally join the company and bring him in at his athletic peak. I think I don't know that they. I think the only issue with bringing him in is how quickly. How long can you keep him in Evolution? Because he would just outshine every time he was in the ring. He would outshine everyone. It would be very difficult to keep him as an underling to Hunter.
True.
You would want to move him out.
Right.
It would be a quick just because of how good AJ Styles is and was back then. I think it'd be very hard to. I think it'd be a great entry point. But how long could you keep him in Evolution once he was there?
True. That is true. It wouldn't. I think it would be a very short lived. That is true. I don't think. I think that would probably not take. It would probably be within 6 months, probably. Maybe Evolution by 05 was just long enough to be fine. Maybe it didn't. But, you got to think that maybe there could have been some light for at the end of that tunnel for evolution in the end there. But I like your Ken Anderson.
Here's the thing. Just thinking with AJ though, and how good he is. Getting back to one of my tried and true formulas earlier in the episode, you bring AJ in, and initially he is so Hunter still in. So he's working with evolution, and Hunter still can't beat Batista. And at this point, maybe AJ, you'd probably end up with the Intercontinental title on him in no time. You wouldn't be able to hold him down. But as the year goes on, you can see AJ elevating, and he's starting to be seen as an equal to Hunter, and Hunter can't get the title back. And by this point, Cena comes over. You do your brand swap because Batista and Cena switch, and then Hunter can't beat Cena either. And then AJ gets a title shot against Cena, and maybe Hunter's like, what are you doing? And it's actually AJ takes control of evolution, and he and Flair boot Hunter out.
That would be funny. That would be very funny, actually. And then you create like a new evolution. I kind of like that. Wow, that's a total different rabbit hole. That's a different looking glass. That's a totally different looking glass. We're looking into some long down the line galaxy there. That's pretty funny. Wow. Let us know what you think. Could evolution have lasted another year? Maybe two? Could evolution have gone into 2007? I mean, remember, by early 2007, Hunter gets hurt, and then if we stayed on that timeline and Hunter does pop the other quad at New Year's Revolution 2007, and then well, here's the thing: how far does evolution go? Because Hunter turns face in 2006. Is that where the face turn comes in? Because him and Flair get booted.
Yeah, well, no, I wouldn't boot Flair out. You just boot Hunter out, and you could have the face turn, and Hunter can run as the face.
So we're reenacting our alternate universe for kicking Flair out of the Horsemen.
Yes, exactly. That's what I said. Going back to
yeah, exactly. I like that. Yep, you're totally right. Yep, I agree. Yeah. That would be funny. I like both those scenarios. Flair's like, it was done to me, kid. You're gonna have to learn your you have to learn your oats. You're gonna have to happen to me can happen to you. That's funny. Let us know what you think, folks. On our Twitter, on our Podbean comments. Let us know. Do you think evolution could have gone maybe another year? What do you think of our horseman choices? I think you'll like. I think we hit some good suggestions. I think our corporation stuff was better than I thought. I thought we really were going to be digging for what the hell we were going to do. I think we came up with some pretty good options. I'm not going to lie. I think more of it was, obviously, besides your rude theory, which I do like, I think a lot of the corporation, as we mentioned, was mostly perception. So we could do a part 2 of factions down the line, Dave, because we wrote some stuff down. We've got other faction suggestions, so we'll definitely do a sequel to this specific topic down the line of more factions, because we got a lot of those. We could still get into that. That was a lot of fun. I've been looking forward to doing that topic for a while. Dave, you say it all the time, but for those that are new to us, how can everyone find you? Because you are one that would love to talk about anything and everything.
Oh, I love to talk to people. If you want to reach out to me, you can find me on Facebook, lurking the boards and the chats, and feel free to reach out to me and drop me a line message. I'd love to chat to you, bounce ideas. I'd love to bounce ideas of potential storylines that we could throw into through the looking glass. What are some mirror universes that you'd love to talk about? I'd love to get into those chats with people. You can also hear me on the Chronoso journey over on the North South Network. We are building at the moment towards Survivor Series 89. So come on in, come on over, have a listen to those. A multitude of people sharing, one match in the journey. And recently I've been salivating. You've got your love for Triple H, and I've shared my love for Demolition. I have literally had just about every Demolition match of note in 1989, talking about their tag title loss to the Brainbusters, and I get to talk about in our upcoming episode their regaining of the titles. So I enjoy talking those sorts of matches. So come over and have a listen to that as well.
Absolutely. And of course, you guys know where to find me. I'm all, Scott C. Podfather on Twitter, obviously PTBN Wrestling on Twitter. You could find me on Facebook. Feel free to message me. I'll talk about anything. And of course, just stay with us here in the network. We have stuff all the time, all of our best shows. So we do recaps and previews, and we have a brand new episode of Main Event this week. We'll preview. We'll recap what happened this weekend at Against All Odds and Clash at the Castle, and maybe look ahead to next weekend, which will be AEW's Forbidden Door. So, Dave, always a pleasure. We will see you in July. Might be a different week. Scheduling, summertime. For me, anyway. And Dave won't be shoveling. Anyway. We'll pick up a great topic in July. We're not sure what we'll do yet. And then August, of course, we usually do some type of Summer Slammy thing. But maybe Dave's got another idea. I knew eventually we'd talk some hog wild, but who knows? We'll come up with something fun, because we do. Anyway, have a great rest of your June, and we will see you in July through the Looking Glass.